Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Country Club Leaders Podcast. I'm your host, Leo McMahon, and today it's our honor and pleasure to have Jeff Isbell, the general manager of the Renaissance Club in Massachusetts, and he's also a CMAA board member. Welcome, Jeff.
Good morning, or good morning where I am. It's great to be here.
Great having you, and thank you for coming on today. So we just talked briefly, and it sounds like you are what this podcast was created for, because you just said in the opening comment before we hit the record button, you started caddying when you're 12 years old.
Yeah.
So can you take us from that point up till today?
We can actually go back even further than that. It's sort of like my life has sort of been like a Forrest Gump of the club management world. When I was younger, my grandparents, this was like 7 or 8 years old, we were living outside of Atlanta, Georgia. They were marshals on the 17th hole of the Bell South Classic golf tournament, which was a PGA stop at the time. And this was my first real exposure to golfing. On the weekends, my grandfather would watch golf on TV, and he'd kind of suffer through that while he was half asleep in his chair. But we went down there, and I got to be around that kind of excitement and atmosphere where there's food and beverage and people walking around. Tom Kite won that tournament, and David Duval played in it as an amateur. I'll never forget that. And Duval almost won. So it was an interesting exposure, and that kind of got me interested in golf a little bit and being around it. So then I went to the range, would play golf with my grandparents. Sometimes they would give me lessons. Sometimes I was just along for the cart ride. And then as I got older, I had moved to a new town, and my buddy said, "Hey, come caddy with me at the local country club." It's the country club in New Bedford in Massachusetts, small local place. And I went there, and I lived there that summer. Sat there. Sometimes, you'd wait all afternoon, never get out, or sometimes you'd get out twice in a day. And I loved it. I loved being outside. My dad would drop me off at 6 in the morning and come get me at 6 o'clock at night. And I just loved the people. Like, to me, everyone was extremely wealthy and different than the world that I knew, right? So I was just fascinated with how everything worked, and that led, to speed the story along. That led into me getting a job working in the bag room. They call it outside ops now, but I was, staging carts and cleaning golf clubs. And then I was, in the wintertime, they needed a valet. And I said, sure, I'll valet. I didn't know how to drive stick. So those were some interesting days trying to park cars on a hill.
How old were you then? How old were you at this time?
That was when I was 16 and a half. I just got my license.
Beautiful.
Yeah, parking cars. And then I went into the restaurant, and I was bussing tables, and then they needed a bartender for a party, and they said, "Do you know what's in a vodka soda?" And I said, "Vodka soda?" They said, "Get on the bar," and kind of learned that way. That was really with everything. I worked a summer in the kitchen on the fryolator, sweating my pants off, and that was just my life. It was just around the club, and I loved it. And I worked all the time. I was sick. I went to work. I wasn't scheduled. I went to work. I loved it. And then I went to college, and naturally, had one of the more well-known hospitality programs at UMass Amherst. So I went into education because I said, I want to be a teacher. I don't need to be in hospitality. And lo and behold, I ended up in the hospitality program, and we can talk about internships and that stuff later. But that's sort of been my career path. No matter what I've done since I was 12 years old, I just have always gravitated back to the private club space.
That's great. I started caddy when I was 12 years old too. I can totally relate to what you're saying. Great start to your career. Great start.
I loved it. It was great. I mean, out in the sun, you're staying out of trouble. It was probably as good for my parents as it was for me.
Right, right. So did you play golf when you were 12 years old, 15 years old?
I've always been around golf. And I've never been a great player. For the, when I was younger and trying to learn, I enjoyed it more. But as I got a little bit older, um, you know, golf wasn't fun to me because people in that space or in my age group were all about having the best clubs and having the best swing and the best clothes. And I, quite frankly, didn't grow up with a lot of money, so I didn't have the best clothes. I didn't have the best clubs. didn't have time to hit balls at the range because I worked all the time, right? So I never got better. So I grew frustrated with it, even though I had opportunities to play at some of the most amazing golf courses in the country. And sometimes I played. More often than not, I said no. But what I did is I rediscovered golf, I think about 4 or 5 years ago when my oldest daughter was born. And a buddy of mine said, "Hey, let's play." And I said, "Okay, I don't really want to play, but dusted off the set of clubs, and we didn't care. We didn't care about our score. We didn't care about our swings. We just went out there and spent time hitting the ball around. Definitely preferred lies. Sometimes a kick in the fairway too. And I realized when you don't care, because I'm never going to win a tournament. But if you play with people who also don't care, you just want to go out and have the social aspect of it. And then in COVID, it was like a boon again. I'm like, oh, let's just go play, get outside.
Right,
And so
right.
I've found a new respect for the game, for me personally. And actually, I just bought a new set of Callaways last week that are coming in. So I'm upgrading
Beautiful.
my equipment a little bit. But yeah, I love the game, just never really loved the seriousness of it. Like if golf could be fun, um, then it's fun for me. And it's funny because that's how we try to recruit women and kids now. Make golf fun, right? And
Right.
it's growing and growing. And I'm like, maybe there's another lane for hacks like me who want to go out and have a good time too and don't care about how long their drive is or how many putts they do.
It's funny you say that. I lived in Florida a year ago, and my weekly game was with three golf pros, and we didn't keep score. We just went around and hit the ball around, had a great time. Nobody kept score. And if a new guy tried to join the group and wanted to keep score, sorry, we don't keep score in this group. We just hit it around and tell some stories.
It's more fun that way, I think. I mean,
I enjoy it.
unless you're planning on, making some money out there, which I'm not, then what does it matter?
Right. Exactly. Exactly. So, what did your father do for a living?
Everything. Blue collar work. He was in construction. He was into the textile business. Never as a manager, maybe, foreman, a shift leader, kind of bounced around and did those blue collar works. And, he actually was for a period of time, he was in, food, worked for Armor Meats, the hot dog company. He worked for them for a while. That's when we were living in Georgia. And then, he was a truck driver was his last job. He delivered steel. So,
Right, right. My father was the same way. That's why I asked the question. Uh, so you go to Amherst and you're in the hospitality program.
eventually, yeah. I mean, I've told this story a few times. I was in the education school, was trying to figure out what made more sense, and hospitality was I'm like, I think that's where I need to be. And then, like any 20-year-old person, I met a girl, and she was across the hall from me, and I had a crush on her. And she was in my intro to hospitality class, and said, "Hey, I know you work at the country club on winter break. Why don't you come to me to this student chapter meeting of Club Managers Association?" So I said, "Yes, oh, absolutely, I'll go. You're going, I'm going to go." And I went, and I'm like, "These are my people." Yeah, the professor there, Dr. Rod Warnick, an amazing guy. And I met other kids who worked in clubs. And if you don't work in clubs, especially at a younger age, you have no idea what that world is. Back in my day, in the late 90s, early 2000s, all your friends for their summer jobs, they were like at the ice cream place or the grocery store, and maybe a fast food. No one understood the world that I was working in. So
Right,
I was
right.
around these kids who had done it, and it was like finally I was comfortable in where I needed to be in college. And that led me to going to my first conference, which is in Atlanta, and went down just because I was going to go on the trip to this conference. Didn't have any expectations, and met this manager at the student showcase where you kind of walk around and you meet managers looking for interns. And I gravitated to this guy. His name's Chris Coulter. Um, and I said, "Well, I want to work for him," but I didn't have a resume. So on a hard kind of floppy disk, I took my friend's resume and wrote my information over it. I didn't copy hers, but I used the template, and then printed it out and left it. Remember, like you would leave stuff for people at the front desk, in those times, and left it. And he called me, and I got my first internship at a club called Bald Peak up on Lake Winnipesaukee in New Hampshire. And
Nice,
then we were
nice.
off to the races.
So I grew up on the golf side of the business, and then as I became a general manager, I had to learn the food and beverage operation and get a little more involved in it. And I played sports growing up, but I've never been around a team atmosphere as powerful as a kitchen during a big event or dinner time or lunchtime. I mean, it is everybody's pulling together. It's unbelievable.
Someone I worked for, I think I think it was John Kinner, described what goes on a on a busy day and as the kitchen being the symphony. And that, you have the drums that are driving the beat, and maybe that's the chef, but like everyone's really important. So you have the strings and you have the woodwinds and you have everyone doing their roles, and everything has to work out correctly. And you have the conductor, maybe that's a general manager directing the show, but every piece it becomes important, even down to the little triangle at the end. And if that you miss that, then you miss the whole thing. And that's like, it sounds silly, but that's like, think about, you have a wedding for 200 people, and then you have a busy men's grill, and then the other there's a something else going on, and everything's got to work just right. And that's when it's exciting, right? And you're like, how the hell are we going to
Right.
do this? And then at 9 o'clock at night, when you're in the parking lot, you're like, shit, we did it. Like,
You know, it was interesting. You said when you were a teenager, even when you're sick, you went to work. Because guess what? Even I don't know what role you were playing, but whatever role it was important. They needed you. You know.
yeah, yeah. I mean, sometimes I was the server in the men's grill, and there, didn't matter if I didn't feel good. There was, 100 guys coming off the course, and you know, I needed to be there. But
Yeah.
it's your role of the team, and I still have that. Like, you don't want to let your team down, right? Like, if I'm not there, what are they going to do?
Right.
Um,
Right.
you know, and that never changed really from when I was a server or a bartender or working in the kitchen. I always felt like I needed to be there. Not that they couldn't do it without me, but like I didn't want to make anyone's day harder. And even as a GM, like, man, I could cut out early tonight, but if I wasn't there for the dinner push, then I feel like I let people down in case they got in the weeds and there's no one there to help. So
Yeah. In the kitchen that the last club I worked at, our dishwasher, his name was Matthew. He was the leader of the kitchen, and he was the
yeah,
dishwasher. I mean, his attitude picked everybody up. I mean, there was no job too big or small for Matthew to handle, you know?
isn't it? It's funny too when you're younger and you kind of take the dishwasher for granted. But as you get older, you're like, that's the most important position we have here. We can't function, if Mary on the grill side doesn't show up, someone can step over there. But no one's lining up to fill in for the dishwasher, right? And so that's why, like, where I work, the dishwasher eats good. Like, here's the fillet, everyone else can get chicken fingers. The dishwasher's getting whatever he wants.
Right. So you're at Amherst. You went on an internship while you're at Amherst?
Interned up at a Balti Colony Club in Lake Winnipesaukee. Old, founded in like 1922, an old school seasonal club. Um, with it's not on it's on the lake. It has golf. It has tennis. Residential component. Old Yankees. A lot of people from Boston, New York, and Philadelphia. Five, six, seven generations of members up there. And I went in as a dining room manager. And went back for 8 summers. So
Wow.
that was
Wow.
my junior year, and I loved it there. And it's funny, I still am connected to some. I've been gone way longer than I even worked there, and I'm still connected to some staff who's there. Their assistant general manager now was a girl that when I was there was in high school would scoop ice cream on the Friday night buffet, and now she's their AGM. It's one of those type of places. It's awesome. And I love yeah, that's always my kind of my home club, if you will.
Right. So when you started out the first year at that club, they made you the dining room manager. Were you nervous? Were you scared or?
oh well, yeah, because you're living away from home. When you're in college, it's a little different. Even though you're on your own, you're still kind of sheltered by the university community. And that wasn't like that was like I was driving, 3.5 hours from home in the middle of nowhere, New Hampshire, Um, we all had our little one bedroom apartments, in apartments to scratch, one bedroom rooms. And I lived above in the clubhouse. It was there's that part of life was being scary. Like I have to do my own laundry, and it can't just be. It's not like shake and wear when you're in college. Like I had to figure out how to iron, how to tie a tie rather than my pre-tied ties that my dad gave me. And then, you know, the staff I had to lead at that point in time, were people who were doing the seasonal work and who had been there 5, 6, 7, 8 and longer years. And so here's this 20-year-old kid who doesn't know where anything is or how to do anything that's now like in charge of these people who are, the career servers, that had been there forever, knew everything. They're training me, and I'm like, oh, now I'm your boss. So you learn, you made a lot of mistakes. A lot,
So
how to treat people, how to talk to people. It was trial by fire. I had some good leaders that held my hand through that, but it was a bumpy introduction, but it was the right introduction. I think like now I still think things that from there 20 years ago, I still remember and do.
can you give me one good story from working at that club?
God. Um, Depend. What type of story do you want to hear? I mean, we always called it was sort of like dirty dancing, right? So, you're up on this lake in the middle of nowhere and you have staff, young staff, old staff. You never knew who was going to end up where. Um, there was some members' kids trying to talk to employees. It was a different time.
Right, right, right.
Um, one of the funny things. So there was. I'll tell you this one. I had to sort through what the PG stories I could tell. One of them was, so as I kind of matured up the line, and I ended up being the clubhouse manager there. And whenever there was issues, the members knew that I was in residence and could call me. So we had one summer in particular. There was always or every summer there was always a party down at the beach, the member beach, and the way things sound, sound echoes off the lake. And so there'd be members in their houses and they'd hear people down laughing and having a good time, music blasting, and it was always the staff's at the beach. You have to go take care of them. Not any single time did I go down there when was it staff members. It was always members' kids at the beach.
Right.
Um, and so this one woman, Priscilla Sherman, would call me and say, they're at it again, and just read me the riot act, calling me in my bedroom at 11 o'clock at night. So I get dressed, drive down to the beach, and it was her kids at the beach. And that was the most rewarding thing that's ever happened to me in my life.
So,
and,
so how
and I
many
remember
people?
the next day, Mrs. Sherman came in to play bridge and said, Mrs. Sherman, you know who was at the beach last night? It was your son and your daughter and their boyfriend and girlfriends. She never called me again.
So how many staff lived at the club?
I think I mean, everyone did for the most part. So
Wow.
40, 50, 60 people. Yeah.
Wow. It must have been interesting there. You're
Because
right.
it's Memorial Day to Columbus Day. So, you don't get it. There was a smattering of year-round, staff, but for the most part, I think we went from a staff of 100 to a staff of 10 in the winter. I only worked there in the winter the last few years I was there because I was doing the seasonal back and forth thing. Went to clubs in South Carolina and Florida. So, um, yeah, it was a unique place. It still is, but it's a little more year-round now than it was when I was there.
So far, I'm hearing you had the great fortune of going to that CMAA intern conference in Atlanta. That sounded like a pretty
Yeah,
good move on your part.
absolutely. Um, it's funny, flash forward, I had to speak for my reelection to the national board this year, and I'm thinking a kid who sat in the back of the room, and I'm not unique to this. There's other board members who have the same experience. Sitting in the room with your dad's jacket and a pair of pants he bought from J.C. Penney, and you're in the back of the room, being like, what is going on? Where am I? What are these people talking about? To then, 20 plus years later, I'm on the stage speaking about the importance of student chapters and in our association in front of, we have almost 4,000 people in attendance and probably 3,000 people in that room that day. I'm like, wow, what a world. Like it's funny how things work out.
Right. So that's a good tip right there. Get involved at an early age with the CMAA if you want to progress.
If you want to do this business, and it's not even, I wouldn't even say, no matter what you want to do, if you aspire to be a general manager, a communications director, a membership salesperson, or even, on the vendor side of the business, like being a part of the association is life changing. Like the networking alone, right? Like the people you meet, you never know when you'll need, a shoulder to cry on or a help getting a job or just some advice. Even like it makes you look good to your own members, like in a small scale, when they're like, oh, I'm gonna go and play in Florida at this club and a member guest, and like I've called down to my friends that are managers there and say, hey,
Right.
the Joneses are gonna be down there. Can you make a big deal about them? And I'm like, oh, we met your friend, Mary, and she brought us a great wine and blah blah, and they'll never forget that. So like those,
Right. Right.
and that's a really cool thing that you don't see in a lot of other industries.
Right.
And it makes you look good at home. So
Good point. Very good point. So you put in 8 years in New Hampshire. Then where'd you go?
so throughout, I was doing winters down. I did 2 winters down at Yamos Hall Club in Charleston, South Carolina, and I did a winter at Jupiter Island Club in Florida. Um, and that's a unique place too.
Yeah. Talk about Jupiter Island Club for a few
Jupiter
seconds.
Island, so it's another one of those old secret. It's not the flashy Palm Beach type of clubs that you hear about, or what's going on in Central Florida or Naples. Jupiter Island is old Northerners that settled down in this community that was owned by a family for a very long time, and now it's its own private club. But same sort of situation. It's residential mixed with staffing, but it's a type of club like the people who own Campbell's Soup were there, the Fords, like the actual Fords were there, the Woolworths, all these kind of classic early 1900 national names. They were all there. There was senators and congressmen, Mikhail Gorbachev, like all kinds of people, but you would never know they were. You would never know they had a dime, let alone they were like millionaires or political powerhouses. Just a very unassuming, casual place. The roof leaked, and they kind of liked that the roof leaked. Um, but that place would be, it was wild on a talk about a manager jumping in. The guy who was there was Bob Gallagher. During like the vacation weeks, the beach club would be like kind of the lunch spot to be. Obviously, it's on the water. There's a pool. They do 500 covers down at lunch, and the GM is in there making chopped salads with his tie around his neck, whipping through, and he loved it. He was never more proud. Like I made 400 salads myself today. Um, but it was a great place. We had a ton of British interns, and I got to spend a lot of time with them. I worked the breakfast shift. I was the breakfast manager. So in the main club, so I worked 6 to 10 in the morning, and then I would at night I would come in and do the maitre d shift, and I'd work 5 to 9 at night. So oftentimes, so I'd finish up and maybe have a beverage or two after work and go to bed, and then at 6 o'clock I'd be walking in to open the shift the next day, and my British staff, all interns, would be piling in from their night out in Palm Beach, getting dressed at the same time.
So was that
And
another
like,
situation where you all lived at the club?
yeah, absolutely.
Wow, nice.
But even
Nice.
there, it's funny. In that club, generationally, there's a group of people who are now kind of industry legends who were there 15, 20 years before me, and they've all remained friends, and they run amazing clubs now. And the group that I was there with, like, there's a bunch of us now that are GMs in our own right at different clubs around the country, and I'm like, and we're all in touch still. It's amazing. Like you never know who you're going to run in a situation like,
Right,
oh, this
right,
is just a winter job, and now these people are, big shots in the club industry, for lack of a better term.
right, right. Yeah, I played there once, and I remember they had I think a grocery store.
Yeah, they have I forget the name of it now. That was a different for me. Like they had their own employee laundry, their own they had their grocery store, their liquor store. a flower shop, a spa, and that was I had never seen that before, and now a lot of clubs have it. But they were
Right.
doing yoga and getting massages and doing facials, and I'm like, and this is new. That was new to me coming from New England, where you don't see a lot of that. So,
Right. So you're doing summer winter interns. You're working up in New Hampshire, and then you move on from New Hampshire.
and moved. So I was in my late 20s. I already had a career under me of experiences, and I worked
A lot
out.
of experience.
It was time to get out of New Hampshire. The GM wasn't going anywhere. Everything was sort of on autopilot. And New Hampshire, in your late 20s for a single guy isn't the greatest place, especially where we were, central New Hampshire. In the wintertime, it gets dark at 4 o'clock. There's nothing, the town goes from 100,000 people to 3,000 people. It just, and it was time. So I became the food and beverage director at Belmont Country Club, just outside of Boston, and that was a beast in itself. So it was a Jewish club, is a Jewish club predominantly, and that was a different experience. High volume food and beverage, high pressure food and beverage. It was very different than the casual summer club that Bald Peak was. This was, you know, it was the real deal. And I'll say, if you could run the dining room or the restaurant at Belmont, you could work any restaurant in the world. Drop you off in Manhattan, um, and it was cutthroat. Like, everyone sat at the same time. The food had to be perfect, and when it was perfect, they sent it back anyway. And you came back out there, and they told you exactly how they felt about you. But you learned a lot about how to deal with members' needs, and talk about anticipating needs. Like, that Mrs. Stein wants, 14 sides of avocado with her, and they all have to be cut differently. But all right, she's coming in. I see her on the reservation list. We got it ready for her, so it's not a surprise. So there
Right,
shouldn't be
right.
any surprises. That's why we do club management, right? And so it was high pressure. It was good. So I was there for 3 years. I was there the F&B director for about a year and a half, and then the clubhouse manager for about a year and a half. And then I moved down the road to Brayburn. Um,
Welcome to the major leagues, though, at Belmont, it sounds like.
whew. But I'll tell you what. So back, I was like 29 years old. This was right at the same time as the recession hit, and then Bernie Madoff took a huge dent on a lot of the members' wallets there. Um, and I still say I never made as much money as I did at Belmont because they took very good care of me. And it was the last place I ever had a clothing allowance. Like, not just dry cleaning. It was like, here's 5 grand, buy some new suits, pal. Like, okay,
Nice.
all right.
Nice.
And I've tried to negotiate for that since, and no one ever gives it to me.
So you
So
leave there. Where do you go next?
just down the road to Brayburn, in Newton, Massachusetts, and
Okay.
as their events director. I had never done events. Um, Belmont had shut down for a renovation, um, and it was time to leave. We had just some different things, difference of opinions, so to speak. And so there's an opportunity again because of my networking. I knew there was this opening at Brayburn, which was a mile from my house. The money was the same, and different experience, different role. I'd never done events on the catering side. I'd always done member a la carte, and I said, let's see what else is out there. Um, and there I went. So I took that job. Um, and it's funny. So I had just agreed to that job, and that's when I got a call from a manager who said, "What are you doing next month?" And this was like March 29th. I said, "Well, like May?" And he's like, "No, April." Um, no, it might have been mid March. And he's like, "Well, would you like to go to Augusta?" I'm like, "For what?" He's like, "Well, we need a tournament beverage director because the person who has been doing it stepped away. I heard you might have some flexibility. Can you come?" So I said, "I think so." He said, "Well, you have to talk to somebody and you have to fill out a background check." So I had a 10-minute phone conversation with someone the next morning. Yeah, this is mid-March, and filled out a background check. And then a day later, there was an airline ticket to fly to Augusta in my inbox. and I was down there for 3 weeks through the Masters. Um, again, from a connection I made through Club Management Association, and it was wild. Talk about a job that I had no business doing. Um, at that time, they flew everybody kind of from other clubs to run various, sponsor tents or member dining, and because the club goes from a small club and it scales up into the massive beast that the Masters tournament in Augusta National is. And back then, like I was the tournament beverage director, so any beverage consumed that was fell under me. So the people who were the beverage managers and the wine sommeliers who had done their own thing for 3 weeks a year, they reported to me. I'm like, this doesn't
Wow.
make sense, and they don't
Right.
do it that way anymore. But it was awesome. Like to go from literally like I got there, you would have known there was a tournament. It's a tiny little clubhouse. Um, to then in 3 weeks we've built up, 19 different restaurants and food and beverage outposts. And they do everything perfectly there. I mean, everything is beautiful, it's pristine, it's professional. If I, anyone who has even a pinky in this industry has to find a way to go down there and see it because the TV doesn't do it justice to just how immaculate things are. When you walk on that first tee box, like they picked us up at the airport and staff isn't allowed. I think they tell everyone this. Staff can't go down Magnolia Drive, which is that classic shot of the dogwoods going up towards the clubhouse. But then they
Right.
brought it. But for you, we're going to bring you down, and you're like, it's like it's like stepping, in the Wizard of Oz when Dorothy lands in Munchkin Land and it goes from black and white to color. That's what it's like driving through the gates at Augusta National.
So how did
Um,
you order all that alcohol and soft drinks? How did you do that?
well, they have it all dialed in. So my responsibility was really like taking the recs, making sure every venue was stocked, taking inventory every night, and refilling, replenishing throughout. So, you get and it was all paper still. This is 2011, and you can't really have phones at Augusta. You couldn't at the time. So it was, we knew that the Mercedes Cottage needed this wine and this food for this event. Um, and you delivered it, and then at night you took the inventory and restocked it again. So would work there literally from sunup to midnight and then back again.
So
Um,
was there any potential disasters that you were able to save the day?
what was the big well, I had learned from someone else's lesson. So on the Tuesday night of the tournament, they do a members reception outside of the clubhouse on the lawn by the 18th green. And the year before, you spend whenever you have to build a satellite bar, it's always a pain, right? You're lugging and tugging. There's not supposed to be a bar here, and now you're bringing everything outside and dodging raindrops. The year before, they had got it all set up, and the members went outside, and the first person went to order a drink, and there was no glassware there. So with that lens, and there was a quote from a manager who I won't say his name, who said, "Are we expecting these people to drink with their effing hands?" And so I knew everything. You gotta have glass. That was the first thing we put everywhere where we build those things was glass. The only so I lucked out. The funny thing is the tournament chairman who they refer to as chairman. Um, his name was Billy Payne, who's passed away. He was the chair of the Atlanta Olympics when they were there in '96, and he was a Georgia Bulldog and um, was the chairman of Augusta National for a while. And his drink was Jack Daniels and the special orange juice. And so
Really?
we had to have his orange juice wherever he was, just in case he wanted it. Now he was very busy throughout the tournament. It wasn't like he was drinking all the time, but you never knew, so you had to have it ready. And so you would we all had, headsets and things, and we would find him. So there would be times you'd have to leave property because you're like, shit, the orange juice we have is this, but his you only have to get from this store across the street. It might have been a Publix or I don't remember what it was. But we had to make sure we always had the chairman's orange juice wherever he went.
Now, did you get a chance to play the golf course or no?
No, no, I walked it. Um,
Okay.
you know, and it's fun. Like they're like Amen Corner. You hear about it your whole life, and then you get out there and you're like, this is it. It's like, uh, it's beautiful. But you're like, this is really, everything just becomes smaller when you see it. Um, and you don't realize though the elevation though. There's a ton of hills at Augusta, but it looks fairly flat when they broadcast it. But
Right,
didn't
right.
get to golf.
So you're the event director at Brayburn,
Yeah,
and how many years were you at Brayburn?
3 years. So that was a fun story. Um, this is when like, oh, sometimes this stuff happens and you're like, what happened? Um, you don't even realize it until everything went through. So, um, in November, the general manager who had been there for 22 years lets us know that he's taking a new job. Um, and this is as we're about to begin a construction project where the club's going to be gone for 4 or 5 months. Um, and we get brought in and just want to let you know we're closing on at the first of the year and people are going to get laid off, but you're all family. We all want you back. I'm like, great. So we're all planning on being back. As we wind through the holidays, people are slowly getting laid off, and now it's just me and a couple other managers and maybe one or two hourly staff. And then all of a sudden, I get a letter. Well, you're going to be laid off for a month. Okay, that's fine. I get it. It was January. Club normally closed in February, but we were doing this gut renovation, no food and beverage. Why not? We can't do events, can't book them. Um, and then um, that month was interesting because that was the month my father passed away. Um, and so he was sick, but I got to be home. So the way it worked out, I got to be there, help out mom, and be there with my dad through his last few weeks. And so things work out and you end up being where you need to be. And
Right, right.
so then I come back to work or expect to go back to work, and they had hired everyone's favorite consultant, and they consulted that I shouldn't go back. And me and a bunch of other people. So they really, within 6 months, the GM had left, the AGM had left, I had left, the food and beverage director left, the controller left, and they just rebuilt it. And now they have and I'm friends with the people that are there now. Great team. The club has transformed itself, and sometimes that stuff happens, right?
Right,
So,
right.
um, but yeah, it was a weird time. But again, the next thing you know, I have a friend who's in software sales, was selling a club software and said, "Do you want to give this a shot?" And I said, "Sure, why not?" um, and it was in Boston, and I won't name their name, but they've now been bought by one of the larger club management software companies. And I did it for 3 weeks. I hated it so much. It
Yeah, I
was
was going to say
sales.
it didn't sound like a good move.
It was sales, but I wanted a job. But during that time, cold calling people, a manager was like, "What are you?" He called me. He's like, "What are you doing?" He's like, I have a clubhouse manager job. Why haven't you applied for it?" I said, I don't know. Is it just come in, let's talk. And I got the job. That was at Tedesco in Marblehead. And I was the clubhouse manager there for 4 years. Um, and then, you know, we've been talking forever. I'll speed up to the next job. Um,
You know what? I just want to cut you off for a second. That's one thing that's great about the club business. There's so many moving parts. You really
right.
can't perfect it. There's always going to be something that's going to pop out of nowhere to
And
brighten up your day.
what I've found is there's a lot of jobs out there that you don't know that are coming. And like if you talk about it, like because we hear people all the time, right, that are in between work or upset with their job. If you tell more people about it, there's always someone like, hey, you know what? I'm looking to make a change here, or I got something coming up. And um, the more you communicate with your peers about what's going on, the more doors open for you. Um, and that's, at the end of my run at Tedesco, I had interviewed for a job, kind of half-heartedly, and because I was sort of my wife was pregnant. Um, like, well, let's see what happens. I could stay here at Tedesco another couple years while we sort things out. And then kind of the same story. A manager called me. at North Andover, and he's like, "Hey, I want to let you know I'm moving." He's like, "I think this gig could be perfect for you." I said, "I don't know. I'm not really interested." And he's like, "Just put your name in." He's like, "They have four candidates. They're already set to interview on the weekend." I said, "All right, well, I'll put my name in. What can the harm be?" So I was the fifth candidate they interviewed that day. And when you walk, I didn't need the job. So when you kind of walk in and have that confidence in you already, you're like, whatever.
Right, right,
And it was in my memory now, it's become inflated. It was like a standing ovation when I walked out of the room, right? And I was maybe 5 minutes down the road, was going to meet my wife for dinner, and the phone rang, and it was the head of the search committee, and she's like, "We want to move forward. You're the only candidate. We're moving forward. Can you come back tomorrow and meet with the board?" I said, "Absolutely." And then I remember that was a hard call, though. The next call I made, I had to call my GM, who had
right,
called me when I was out of work and offered me this
right,
lifeline and
right,
got me this job. And I
right,
said, "Hey, this is happening a lot quicker than I thought." And he
right.
was proud of me. He was happy for me more than anything. So
That's a good story.
yeah.
That's a good story. So talk about that interview. What did you do in that interview that you think made him, other than you're very confident, what do you think wowed him?
I think, as silly as it sounds, I was natural. I was genuine. I didn't. There weren't any canned answers. I was
Right,
just myself, and I was honest. And it wasn't. I didn't say things that I think they wanted to hear.
right,
Um, and I learned from that, and I've done that now in a couple other interviews, or how I got to my job where I'm at now. Just be yourself. This is a this is a business of relationships, right? And people can spot a phony a mile away. And like
right,
we've all done it. We've been managers and we've said things, and like, where the hell did that come from? That's not something I say.
right,
Um, and so I got to be I was myself. And because all of us can, if you're in this long enough, you can all kind of give the BS answers, right?
right.
Um, but if you can't be genuine, then you're nobody. So
And I learned that along the way too. I used to try to impress them with my handouts. They really
right.
just want to have a relationship with you. That's the main thing, like you said.
Know you already, right? Like having done this long, they look at your resume, and now with LinkedIn and social media, and it's such a small world that they probably know someone at your club. Um, they already know if they like you before you step foot in there. So why not just be authentic?
Right, right. So now you're the general manager. So what was that difficult when you first started?
Yeah, my first time as a general manager, I remember walking in that day, and my predecessor, it was his last day, right? He had given me the keys, and here's your desk, and then you sit there and you have this moment, like, well, what am I supposed to do? And I was like, sometimes even now, 8 years later, I'm like, the hell am I supposed to do today? Um, but so that's what I remember the most, and then like, of course the president who was there when I got hired said famous last words. It's like, we got things pretty much dialed in, and there's no landmines here. We're set up for success. And that lasted about 5 days. and then and then we found a lot of landmines.
Right, right,
Um,
right,
but that club was so many things I learned there. I did a renovation project there. We did a membership survey that they had never done. We made a change from a sacred cow long-term golf pro that had been there for 27 years, and I got to lead that process. That you know important things that you wouldn't learn unless you do them, but like are great things to have in your resume and talk about in other interviews. Capital
So, so
planning.
how so how did that go with this 27-year sacred cow?
Oh, it was so easy. Nope. Oh, it was so hard. It was really hard. We did things the right way. Like it was a process that took probably 9 months. There was a from a review to a performance improvement plan to the actual termination. The way we handled some communication around it was probably not great. But no one really know. Everyone was afraid to say anything, so we didn't say anything, So, or no one wanted to say the wrong thing, so we said nothing at all to the membership. So they weren't super informed on the process, and that led to some bad faith and some rumors that weren't true. Um, that we, as I said to the board, because they weren't really putting out a unified message, even though they were behind the scenes. I said, well, all of you, since this decision was announced, and we informed him on, the end of September, but he would finish out the year into December. And I said, so all of the board made this announcement, and then you guys haven't been at the club, and I'm here, walking through the firing squad on a nightly basis. And what it really was, we had about 5 members that were really angry and 300 that were really happy, right? But the 5 angry ones were making a lot of noise.
Right.
But flash forward to, and I'm not there anymore, but where that program has become and the pro that we hired, it now has one of the largest junior PGA programs in the state. The pro just won Professional of the Year for New England. Like, it was right.
Right. Right.
Participation went up immediately, sales went up, merchandise, like, it was time. It was the right move for the club.
Right.
And sometimes, what's great about the club business is there's a lot of loyalty that you have towards staff members and such. But that's also what's really bad about the club business, is because sometimes you're like, I don't want to, that's Peter. We don't really want to do anything. That's just how he is. But then what's that person doing that's blocking so much good things from happening? So,
Right. That
and that's
I'm just thinking during my time, the sacred cow scenario, that was probably the most difficult part of the job, because
right,
you wanted the best for the club and you didn't want to hurt anybody and you didn't want to upset anybody, but sooner or later you had to do something.
right. Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard, really
But it
hard.
was the right thing to do. I know that ultimately it was the right thing to do.
So you're there now. Now, what do you move on to next?
So Renaissance, where I'm at now. So here's another kind of story where Jeff doesn't do what he's supposed to do. So I'd been there 4.5 years. We did the big renovation project. It was a smaller club, and I was looking for the big payday now, right? Now I can take that step up and get the big job. Interviewed, got flown in and offered a job to this club on the South Carolina, Georgia line. Then my wife looked at the job in the area and she said, absolutely not. And then, a couple weeks later, randomly got a call from someone at a club in Virginia, flew down, really liked it. Didn't think I would like it. My wife loved the area, ended up being the runner up there. So I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna sit put now and not interview. Two kind of things that I felt bummed about. One not getting, one having to turn down. Let's just, ride this out another year or two here in North Andover and figure out what's next. And then I got a call from Kurt Keebler from Copland Keebler and Wallace, and there was Renaissance, which is about 6 miles down, maybe 10 miles down the road from where my club was. And it's like, what do you think about this job? I said, absolutely not. Nope. We had shared members there too, so I knew a little bit about it. I said, that's not for me. Don't want to do it. Can't do it. He's like, okay. 2 days later, he emails me. Do you think you could just talk to, the vice president there? Could you just talk to him and see what you think? I said, I don't know. I don't think so, Kurt. I don't think it's the right job for me. And then later that afternoon, my treasurer came in and we were finalizing the budgets. Um, and he was just rude to me. And he caught me in the right moment. And I went, okay, have a great day, sir. And and I emailed Kurt and I said, on second thought, I don't want to put up with this guy another year. So, um, I had a conversation with the vice president of club, and then came in, interviewed, um, kind of over 2 weeks. I had a couple interviews, and then I accepted the job. Um, and I was not a place that I thought I would ever go because it's developer owned, and that was something I never worked
Really?
for.
Okay.
I'm like, this is a different animal for me. And we talked in our first interview about EBITDA, which is earning before tax, blah blah blah. Still don't really know what it is, but I like bullshitted my way through an answer and then Googled that on the drive home. I'm like, what the hell is EBITDA? I've never heard of that word before. We don't talk about that in member-owned clubs. Um, and so the great thing now is I'm learning some of that business world that I wouldn't have had I stayed in member necessarily. So, um, it's different having a corporate ownership structure where there's a corporate team that handles marketing and communications and sales and stuff and funnels things down. It's different. It's a learning experience. But in some ways, it's better because I don't have a board, I don't have committees, but I have corporate, and they have their own kind of missions and things that they pass on to us. So it's been pretty neat.
So how do the members ask you what they want or tell you what they want? Do they have a way to communicate to you?
Well, our members are not shy, um, but they do. So there's an advisory board
Okay.
that I pick,
Oh, great, great.
and so we meet quarterly. Um, and talk about, the superintendent, the membership director, and the golf professionals come from the club, and we meet with these folks. And there's a good cross section, kind of a serious golfer, um, a social person, a kind of a newer member, a long term. So we try to kind of have a good representation of the membership there. And so we sort of report out, here's what's going on, and we solicit feedback from them. And then we do survey them every year. And that survey is critical because that's how our whole staff gets their bonuses based on numbers we have to hit from satisfaction surveys. Um, so we feed out that way. Um,
So at the member-owned club, how'd you deal with micromanaging? I'm sure you had to get a little bit to some degree.
yeah, no, members never micromanage. Um, it depends. Every moment is different, right? So, like on the house committee level, you have to be this sympathetic person and take their ideas and their criticism, but you have to root everything in fact, right? And so, one of the things I said to my last house chair was, you can't say they said or this is what I'm hearing. Like you need to come to me with names in situations because otherwise you're making it up in my eyes. I need to because every time they hated the food or this one family hated the food. Um, let's give real life examples. But that's from building trust, right? And you have to show that you can deliver on the product that they want, and then bring new ideas to them that work. And so you have a good relationship with them.
Right. Uh, so at the developer-owned course, is there any micromanaging there that you want to talk about or no?
They might not if they listen to this. No, honestly, they don't micromanage. They give you you have to hit your targets, right? It's kind of like a map, but with there's a beginning and an end, but no middle. You have to get to where they want you to go, and they'll help you as much as you want. But you got to hit your numbers and get and deliver what their expectations are. Our portfolio, we have 5 clubs. One's in Scotland, one's in the Bahamas, one's in Virginia, and there's 2 in Massachusetts, but they're all very different. So it's not one size fit all. You can't say, here's some programming we're going to do
Right,
in
right,
the
right,
Bahamas because it doesn't work in Haverhill, Massachusetts.
right.
So they give us a lot of rope, which is great.
So of all your years, who was the best employee that you had working in the kitchen?
Depends on how you define employee. The best I'll say there was a guy that I worked with that was the most talented employee I've ever seen. And his name was Clemens Kulig.
Now,
Um,
what made him the most best or talented employee?
he could do anything. Um, he was the garmager, but he could do ice carvings, um, everything he made from scratch. Um, and he would, you know, Clemens enjoyed a beverage or two, but he would go, he would work 100 hours a day, and like the detail on everything, like just the things on a buffet. If he would do a buffet, the carvings he did in fruit and the shapes he did, um, just the product, the look of the product all looked like art, um, in my mind, and it was just
So extremely talented.
very talented. And he was super. So he knew everything. He flew planes in his spare time, like one of these guys. Yeah, I mean, I think yeah, he'd be a therapist dream, but he could do. I mean, he was just such a smart guy, such
And
a
did he get
talented
along with
guy.
all the staff?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
When he wanted to, he was an artist, right? So when he wanted to be friendly, he'd be friendly. But when he was in his zone, he wouldn't talk to you. But he
now
was the most talented guy. Yeah, and
how
then I'll say
about
like my.
go ahead.
It's been interesting where chefs have gone when I started, and the chefs being the bullies and yelling at you for making a mistake, to now that those people don't exist much anymore. And they're all, they're creative teachers and leaders now. Like, um, you know, they can bite their tongue certainly more than when they did in the 90s when I started doing this. And I've worked with some really good chefs, good people. And that's really what it's all about. It's the people, right? Like,
It is nothing worse than a chef with a bad attitude. It just brings the whole place down. I think.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I remember being a kid, being having things thrown at you if you rang in the wrong order, and now can you imagine that happening now? Like,
So how about in the golf operations department? What's the best employee and why? What made them stand out?
well, I'll say, let me give a plug to my most current club is this. There's a guy named Jeff Walker. He's been there 14 years. He's his title is Director of Player Development, right? So he's the one who just ordered my new Callaways for me. Um, but he's been there 14 years, got a young family. Um, he's just got a good calm presence. Nothing riles him up, whether a member comes in being salty or not. He's not affected by it. Just got a good demeanor, always smiles, and always comes from a place of how can I solve this problem for you, rather than you're wrong and here's why. And that's, that'll get you far in this business, right? Like you come from a place of yes. I think it's if you take an improv class, one of the things they say, you can't say no, you have to say yes and. Um, and that's kind of, people who are forward or member facing, that's the skill they have to have. And he nails it like every time.
Yeah, I had a chef that worked with me, and he had that skill. He was just great at it. He said, "Leo, I learned this stuff when I was 5 years old, how to get along with people."
Right.
He would never argue with anybody. Okay, we'll take care of that. That's a good idea. And his life
Isn't that
was
the way,
smooth.
right? I mean, think about if you're even in marriage, it's a lot easier to smile and say yes, dear, than it is to put up a fight. So, um,
So how about golf course maintenance?
um, I will tell you again, the guy that I work with right now, Chip Fitzgerald, and this is his first superintendent's job. He's been the assistant at some of the iconic clubs out on Long Island and Connecticut, and he's been with us for about 3 years. He's brilliant in managing to his budget, and he does a great job with maybe not every tool he needs. To our course is spectacular. But what I like about him most is he educates me and can dumb it down to my level, because he'll talk for 2 hours about fertilizers and grass growth, but he makes it sound interesting, and he speaks it, when I say, tell me like a third grader
Right.
what's going on out here, and he's just fantastic. Um,
So I
and
always thought I always thought those guys or ladies had the most difficult job in the business because there were so many things that were out of their control, you know?
Especially, New England, like, so we aerated yesterday, and today we have sleet and freezing rain and 3 inches of snow, and before that it rained an inch and a half. Um, well, he's got top dressing all out there. So hopefully, it doesn't freeze and kill the grass um, but that's out of control. It rained 28 out of 32 weekends last year.
Wow.
Um, the year before that, it didn't rain for 7 months. How do you manage that? And they, he pulled it off. And that's what, like, they're magicians, and everybody, you know, will say this about, and you came from the golf side, so don't take this personally. Everyone thinks because they can cook dinner at home that they can be the chef or they can be the server. Everyone thinks because they mow their own lawn at home or have grass in their yard that they know how to, how a golf course should be. No one ever thinks that they could be the golf pro, though. So
Right, right,
everyone's
right.
always they get put on a pedestal. But the superintendent, that's a magician's job.
Yeah, because the staff sometimes they don't show, the equipment breaks down, the parts
It's
don't come in.
right, and especially now since like COVID and supply chain stuff, all the time we're like, oh, it'll be 3 to 6 weeks on a part. So that's why a great mechanic is super important. Um, but yeah, early mornings, long days, it's hot. It's a tough job.
So if you were going to pass on any advice to a 18 or 21-year-old entering the business, what would you tell
Don't do it. No, I would say
them?
no. I would say honestly, you know it's the best career I think for anyone who likes people, um, like taking care of people. The money is decent. The lifestyle that you and I grew up on, doesn't exist anymore. The quality of life is there. Work-life balance is important. Um, it does mean some nights, it does mean some weekends, but a lot of jobs mean nights and weekends. And especially in the cell phone era, you're never really off. So um, it's a good life. Um, you meet some amazing people, and maybe it's not the career for you, but the connections you make along the way, it's a great pathway of getting you to whatever else you want to do. And your people skills are there. And if you don't want to manage F&B, you can be in marketing. If you want to be a salesperson, you can be in membership or the clubs that have real estate. There's a pathway to a million different things through where clubs are going. And in the future, who knows where we're going, right? Like, clubs used to be so slow and changing, and that's now just not the case. Clubs are evolving so quick. I think we're going to be tied in with, you know, it wouldn't surprise me that clubs become like a CVS and there's going to be nurses. It's already happening, with medical professionals on site to help members with things. And there'll be financial planners. There'll be like little micro cities. It's awesome where we're going.
So you just mentioned it, work-life balance. So I'm retired now, and 8 hours of sleep, eat healthy, exercise, hang out with friends and family, do some spiritual work. Do you have the time to do that kind of stuff? Because
Yeah,
if you're well rested and a well-rounded person, you're going to perform better.
right. I will say I am getting better at being home when I need to be home, which was always a struggle for me. Like for now, my wife had to work, and I would have fought tooth and nail and made her stay home 5 years ago. But going to work's important for her. And me being here with my kids, even though I've been on a podcast with you for an hour, is important. Um, and so, even yesterday, like I'm sitting at my desk, one of those things, like I don't really have much to do. I'm going to go home and be home for dinner and play a game with my kids. Um, so I'm getting there. I'm more guilty. My work doesn't make me do that. My employer, I do that to myself, and so I have to learn
Right,
that.
right,
Making time to go to the gym. Like if I don't go to the gym, I'm usually a little more cranky.
right.
Um, So make the time to go. Even, as my wife says, if you can, because when I usually there for an hour and a half. She's like, sometimes if you can only do 45 minutes, that's okay. Get in the time that you can get in, you know. Um, oh, and then the other thing you mentioned, finding time for spirituality. What I've been working on and plugging in my calendar is just finding time to reflect on kind of everything and take a half an hour once a week just to write down wins, losses, things you could have done differently. And that list gets a little bit longer and changes every week too, right? Like, and it's not just work, it's what I should have done a little bit differently at home or how to better prioritize and, kind of your own little personal review every week.
Right. I remember one time I texted an employee at like 8:30 at night, and she texted back to me, "Leo, go to sleep. Turn that mind off." And she was
I actually did
100%
that with
right, you know?
my membership director replied to a bunch of my emails at like 5:30 in the morning, and I was up because I just get up early, and I'm like, "What are you doing?" And she's like, "If you're gonna send me an email at 11 o'clock at night, I can reply to you at 5:30." I'm like, "Well, let's stop doing that to each other." Like,
And she's right. Whoever sent you that,
right.
it's right. Uh, that's the other thing I wanted to pass on to you. When I retired, I didn't realize the stress I was under until I retired. It was like, whoa, this is great. Because I
We
don't
had
even know
our
how I don't think we realize how much stress we're under when we're
I
working
think you're
these
right.
jobs.
There's a manager who isn't, she's relatively young, but she retired. And now she does interim work. And I saw her at conference, and she's lost a lot of weight, looks refreshed and younger. And I said to her, said, "Christina, you look amazing." She's like, "Because I retired." And she's like, "I don't have stress. I have time to eat healthy and work out, and I manage my whole life around me, not around the members." And like, ooh, well, it works. So,
Yeah,
and now she
yeah.
does the interim gig, so she's there for 3 months here, 3 months there, and it's working out for her.
Well, Jeff, on that note, I think we'll wrap it up. But this has been great. Tremendous respect for you and your background and experience. I mean, that's an awesome work history. It's unbelievable. It's everybody should aspire to that to have your work history.
Well, I'm aspiring to retire, but I got about 20 years to go. That's
But there'll always be something new for you tomorrow, right?
it'll never
Something new
end.
to learn.
Absolutely. Well, this is great. It's
Well,
so nice to meet you. I appreciate you taking or having me on.
thanks again, and best of luck to you this year, and hopefully you'll help the CMAA out a lot. We appreciate it.
Absolutely. That's the plan.
Thank you for your
Thanks, Leo,
work.
so much. Take care.
Have a good day. Bye bye.